Alrighty, Samsung, the billboard says we gotta remove Dynamic Island in future generations of iPhone, so I hope you can get those sensors underneath the display, please, and thank you. But Apple, I kinda like the Dynamic Island, though. It's kinda cool. This is precious. The consumer has fallen in love with the design compromise. What? I mean, it's cool. You got all the notifications, and for multitasking, you can just hold it down and it just dynamically changes. It's kind of nice. We were so good at hiding the eye hole that now you don't want to get rid of it, do you? I know your goal was to get rid of the notch, and you wanted it to look different, and you want to have more screen area, but now it just sits in with the UI so well. I don't know. It feels like it should be there. I didn't remove the notch for you. You what? I did it for me. I was good at it. I liked it. Maybe you just leave the Dynamic Island in the UI even if you get rid of the cameras, and then it just goes away when you're watching videos in landscape? Or we could stuff more crap up there that you won't need. Yeah, that's fine too. I'll probably buy it. Sounds good. Let's begin. According to a fairly reliable leaker on Twitter known as Majin Buu Official, I don't know who comes up with these names anymore, what happened to just regular names, but they claim Apple is prototyping having 2 front-facing cameras on the iPhone 15 Ultra, which again is so far out, it's not finalized. You gotta take everything with a grain of salt, but I thought the topic, especially since it's coming from a somewhat reliable source, was worth considering, because now that the Dynamic Island is out, the 14 Pros are selling like hotcakes. They're super back-ordered. Apple's increasing panel supplies for 14 Pro production because I think a lot of people have enjoyed their Dynamic Islands, plus the improved cameras, the always-on display, everything else that came with the 14 Pros, that maybe based on the initial response of this, Apple might lean into the Dynamic Island a little bit more, especially if there is going to be an iPhone 15 Ultra of sorts, which multiple sources said is now possible. But we should probably just take a step back for a second and ask ourselves, like, why bother? What's the point in putting a dual front camera on the iPhone, right? Like, we've had dual cameras for a while on the back, but are there advantages to having one on the front? I mean, for one, it almost certainly would have to be an ultra-wide lens, because telephoto on your FaceTime calls to zoom in on your acne, just, yeah, that doesn't sound very likely. Ironically, this is not an original concept, considering very innovative companies like Google have implemented dual front-facing cameras on the ever-beloved Pixel 3, which had absolutely no problems and no criticisms whatsoever. Please bring me back to Team Pixel, Google. I mean, it had, you know, an ultra-wide lens and a regular lens, but I felt like Apple had kind of already fixed that desire for most people just by having a very wide-angle 12-megapixel sensor on the front-facing camera, and then if you brought it to portrait mode, you got it cropped in a little bit, and just by having a digital zoom, you could achieve mostly the same thing as a dual front-facing camera. But perhaps Apple wants to take this a step further and have an extremely wide angle view on the front, but the part of this report that's interesting is they're saying this would be restricted to the Ultra. So part of the reason I can kind of understand the mindset there is perhaps Apple realizes the Dynamic Island works on the 6.1-inch iPhone 14 Pro, you know, dynamically fluctuating back and forth as it does depending on what you're doing, but the 15 Pro Max or the 15 Ultra, whatever they call it, has all of this extra screen real estate up there because it's a bigger phone, and perhaps next year the bezels might get a little bit thinner or the displays might get a little bit longer. So if that's true, then you could have a Dynamic Island XL, if you will, or a Dynamic Island Duo, or a Dynamic Island Plus, or Pro, or Mac. Oh my god, the marketing names. Who just remembers good old-fashioned Slofies? Does anyone Slofie anymore? But yeah, essentially by adding another camera up there, the Dynamic Island would be a bit wider, but the widget space alongside it, the display ears, as we've called them in the past, would essentially be the same size as the regular 6.1-inch model. So once again, adding hardware advantages to the Ultra will encourage and convince more people to opt for the more expensive model, which is obviously what Apple wants for all of us at the end of the day, to have a deeper hole in our pocket, to make that Apple Card just a little bit more yellow every year. But obviously for the consumer that doesn't want the larger size iPhone, this obviously sucks. I always get bummed out when Apple restricts a lot of the exciting upgrades to the most expensive model, because then it feels feels like they don't try as hard with the smaller models. So if it ends up being the case that the 15 Pro is just not all that different because Apple went all out with the 15 Ultra, then I could see a lot of people that are comfortable with that form factor being like, oh, come on. What about some of us out there who have normal size hands that don't like the pinky cutout getting deeper every year? Check your pinkies, by the way. Our sharp-edged iPhones like to cut into them when you're using them one-handed for extended periods. But my guess is that if this ends up being true, Apple will have like dual 12 megapixel sensors on the front, one that is incredibly wide angle, like maybe even wider than that of the ultra-wide lens on the back of the iPhone, because they know this is going to be used on the front, perhaps even enabling center stage, if you will. I don't know if that's too crazy to have on an iPhone, because most of the time you're not propping up your iPhone on FaceTime and walking like several feet away from the person you're talking to, because you can't even see them. But I guess maybe having a ultra-wide sensor that can crop in and zoom and track you across the room, I don't know, it's one of those kind of crazy, stupid features I could see Apple upselling people to get. Everyone's like, that's ridiculous, why would I need center stage on my iPhone? Oh, wait a second, that's kind of cool though. But there's other potential advantages that of course I'm speculating on here. If you don't like speculation, you found the wrong channel. In fact, if you don't like speculation, don't watch anything under the brand Tailosive. But my theory is that with having two front-facing cameras on the iPhone, Apple will be able to more easily collect depth data, because now they have, you know, the parallax effect. They can compare angles between two separate cameras, and therefore maybe this extra lens will allow for selling points, you know, hey, center stage on the iPhone, or ultra wide view on the front now, higher resolution or better low light performance thanks to these dual sensors. Plus, you could start replacing the dot projector or the IR blaster that they're currently using for face unlock, and eventually move towards more of a vision-based approach where you don't necessarily need dedicated sensors for 3D mapping data. Now you can just have two camera sensors with a really, really good neural engine, of course, baked into the A17 or A18 chip, and that means in the future, Apple theoretically could just have two cameras on the front combined together, maybe even thinner than that of the current dynamic island, and that can recreate Face ID and also give you more photography, videography options, or FaceTime options. And on top of that, maybe if they boost the megapixel count, like they did on the back, and say perhaps install a 48 megapixel camera sensor on the front of the phone, then one day there could just be one camera hole, and that's able to, with advanced algorithms and extreme machine learning and artificial intelligence training, recreate what Face ID does just by checking the lighting environment, and it would be really hard to fake. But yeah, there's lots of face unlock across Android phones that are less secure, and I just see Apple, especially now that they're bringing back the 2x button, which is really just a digital zoom on a larger sensor, going down the route of, well, the higher end phones can have two cameras on the front, but the lower end phones, we're gonna start replacing sensors and doubling up on capability, and maybe that can help them reduce pricing, or more importantly, make it easier for them to bake cameras or sensors underneath the display in the future if they ever want to completely eliminate the dynamic island, which again, I feel like a lot of people are getting so comfortable and used to now that the iPhone would just start to look weird or bizarre if it didn't have dynamic island. Like, you're really gonna ditch all of these different animations and multitasking menus that you have a dedicated display driver for within the A16 chip. You're gonna ditch all that just so you can put the carrier name and the time up there at all times? Yeah, no. I feel like Apple's gotta have a bigger game plan in store for the future of the iPhone when it comes to camera sensors going underneath the display. But needless to say, with all of this speculation, Apple was pretty freaking genius by turning a camera cutout into a feature, to where now I feel like they could easily go 5 to 7 years without putting anything underneath the display, and no one would really care. The only time the dynamic island really bothered me was when it wasn't dynamic and I was just watching YouTube or playing a game and you just have this big hole in the display and it's not doing anything because you're in landscape. So I could see them, you know, keeping the island in the future, and then once you bring the phone to landscape mode to watch a video or something, then it completely goes dark and the cameras are just hidden by the display pixels. Hopefully that's where we're headed, and it's a nice little compromise in the middle. But what do you guys think? Does having dual front-facing cameras make sense on the iPhone 15 Ultra? Are you fine with just having one lens, or having an ultra-wide lens with a high megapixel count that you crop in on? All that good stuff. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. This is your Apple Sheep here, and I'll see you all in the next one.